This is Longview Unplugged's interview with Gost. So thanks, Cody, for coming and doing this interview with us. So we're just going to start off with just asking you about Gost and how Gost got started and what inspired you to start Gost.
That's the question.
That's the question.
Okay. So I guess around like 7 years ago, I just got kind of tired of being in a band with a lot of people and having to schedule things around other people's schedules and deal with other people's creative drama, I guess. And so I just started making music on a laptop and posted a few things, and some people liked it, and here we are.
Kicked off, huh? So, like, obviously in Longview, like, the number one type of music that people listen to is typically like country or Texas country or even some rock and roll classic genres. So you're obviously in the synthwave music genre. So kind of like explain to people that might be listening that's never like heard your music before. Explain like synthwave and like not just synthwave, but like your music style and like how you incorporate like the diversity in your music.
Okay, so like synthwave started, I think, around like 2010 on like MySpace.
Of course.
And it was really mainly just super throwback, really 80s inspired music. And then a few of us started making more horror inspired 80s music. And over time, that kind of became the main focus of what synthwave was, even though kind of what I do really isn't synthwave. And just over the years, I changed a lot as a person anyway, so the music has changed and progressed into, much more heavy, industrial, goth type tones.
Right. So like some like people have like labeled you online as like, obviously, your aesthetic is goth, but some people have labeled you online as like the satanic synthwave artists. Like, what is your thoughts on that? And like, how do you feel about that when people place that label onto you?
Well, early on, I would say like around like 2013, there were a few of us using, upside down crosses and things like that in our imagery, just because in electronic music it's never been done.
Yeah.
And a lot of us used to play in metal bands.
Right.
So the label is dead on early on, but I wouldn't say that the music's like satanic or that was really. It was really just more about changing up the imagery with how electronic music can be perceived.
Combining like the metal and the synth and going with the aesthetic and
absolutely
things like that. Okay, so let me ask you this. So obviously you are like you're world renowned. People stream your music from Europe to the US, and just recently before we started this interview, you told me that actually you're most streamed in like the LA area. So on your tours, like who are some bands that you've toured with? Who are some bands that you've even headlined? And where have you toured?
So I've toured with bands like Mayhem, which is like the big black metal band with all the 90s controversy, murder and ridiculous. Them and like Three Teeth and Perturbator and so many bands. Black Dahlia Murder. And what was the second part of that question?
No worries. I said, and where have you toured?
I think I've toured around 30 countries at this point. So like everywhere in the US, the UK, I've been to Russia, I've been to Slovakia.
Nice.
Anywhere over there that isn't too oppressive to let people come in.
Okay, so like what was like the defining moment in your career, like where you realized that, where you had kind of gotten to the point to where like you are touring worldwide, like people love what you have, like you're legit, people want to stream your music everywhere. Like what was that defining moment for you as like an artist, and like around like what time frame was that? Was that like 2 years into your music career? Was it like a year? Like how long did it take you to get to the point to where you were like, this is like my life, like this is what I do as a living?
I guess it was probably 3 or 4 years. I did the first like European tour with Perturbator and Dan Terminus, and we were all on the same label at the time. But probably a year later, 2016, I was doing like a headline tour in Europe, and I guess that's when it finally felt like, well, I guess I can do this.
That full time. Yeah. So what has like being like a touring artist like all over the world, like what has that taught you about just like the music industry in general? Like what have you learned like just about all of that and being as like diverse that you are in your creativity and stuff?
The artists in the music industry that get to tour and travel a lot, we kind of become like really close friends, because it's like it's almost like being part of a local scene. You see the same people when you're traveling and everything, and that's like the best part of it. As far as like the music industry goes, business-wise, it's lacking. I don't know. It's it's all about money. It's all about the wrong things. I don't know.
Right.
It's hard to explain.
So like we did an interview last episode, or whatever you want to call it. We did an interview with Post Profit, which is a local Longview band. You know, they're not touring worldwide or anything, but one of the questions that we had asked them was, you know, like what is it, like what kind of stigmas do you face, you know, kind of being kind of like the outside of what's typical to Longview. And like, even though probably, you know, the more rock centered genre is more acceptable, like what kind of obstacles do you face being kind of like out of that box of what people expect, like people who live in this community to be? Like, what has that been like for you?
I mean, it's been easy because I've kept a very low profile locally. Like this is the first thing I've done locally as far as, so it's easy. I mean, it's strange. I've been like actually in this bar a couple times, and someone's recognized who I was, but not because I'm from Longview, because of the music. So Gost, it's strange. Yeah. But yeah, I don't know. Being that there's like certain imagery involved and things like that, and I have children, I try not to get too involved in the community. Right.
Which is fine. I mean, you know, being like somebody who has to tour all over, it's probably easier keeping low key than it is, you know, being like a face in the community and stuff, especially being in like a small town like Longview. And that kind of spawns like my next question. So what are like your opinions as somebody who's like really experienced the world and really like, this is your full-time career, this is what you do, this is what you've made for yourself. Like, what is your opinions on Longview as like a city and how we treat our music and art scene? Like, what do you think? Like, where do you think we can improve? Or how do you feel like Longview accepts people who may like fall in line with you as an artist, or just like artists and musicians in general?
I think it's getting better, you know, with the whole art walk thing that they're doing. I think it's really kind of cool. It's something you would see in somewhere like maybe Austin or something. Right, yeah. But being a closer community, you know a lot of the people there. But with like music, local music, maybe music that's made by people that are under 18, there's not really anywhere for them to do that. So as opposed to when I was making music at that age, it's non-existent now. So I don't know what can be done to rectify that, but there needs to be a space for younger musicians in this community to explore that, because I know there are younger musicians, but without any kind of cultivation or place to express themselves, it's just gonna, hinder them as far as moving on.
Right. So would you is there anything that you would suggest that the people like in this town, like let's say there's people that are more like art and musically centered, is there any like thing that you suggest that they do to help like inspire that, or like some sort of like community activism that can be brought together to help like cultivate the music scene, the art scene? Like, would you suggest anything personally that you think would help?
Yeah, I mean, we used to have, there were different venues in town. There was a place called the Lion's Den that we used to be able to rent out, and some people rented those places. I mean, we're talking like 15 years ago, and didn't clean up properly and kind of got all of that squashed. Like, even I think the Judson Rec Center over by the school,
Yeah.
people used to be able to use that. I don't know, it would be nice to see those places be open again, because underage shows they're extremely important for any town to build something.
Right.
I mean, it's a good place for kids to go if, obviously things are controlled and cleaned up properly. And I know there's a scene for it, and without having that scene, I don't know what the younger generation's doing.
Right.
I mean,
Yeah.
You talked about Lost Prophets. These are older guys. They had nothing until they could play in like a bar.
Right. That's true. That's very true. So, like, obviously Longview Unplugged, like, our whole initiative is to kind of reignite like the inspiration of being open in the music and the art and the creator and kind of like the outcast community. Like, that's always been a thing. But I feel like in smaller communities, we kind of feel like we need to keep that low key. And so I feel like Longview Unplugged, like, our vision is to kind of like, no, that needs to be high key. Like, let's talk about it. So there's been a lot of people that have tried to start up like cool bars or cool scenes in Longview, and it hasn't really quite, it hasn't been like super successful. And I agree with you that like there is a community, there is a scene here. And what do you personally think is like the reason why, even though there's a lot of people that support us and like even you and like our idea, like what do you think it is the reason why we're not able to like continue to be successful in creating that scene? Is it just because like our own kind, like our own people aren't, they're not showing up when they need to show up, they don't need support, or is it because we just literally lack the resources? Like, what do you think like the issue is of why we can't cultivate that scene more?
I think it's a bit of both. I think one thing with the younger people, they kind of need to control that. Like, we had control over the shows we put on back when I was younger, and so the lack of adult supervision created more of a safe place for young people to express themselves how they wanted, and nothing really crazy ever happened. And there is this weird, there's no forum for, the alternative people in Longview to come together. So
Right.
I see people, at Walmart that look like somebody I should totally be hanging out with, and I've never seen them.
Right.
I don't know who they are. So I don't really know, what the answer is there. But it needs to happen.
Well, I can say like personally, like obviously like we know each other, and like being a little bit more out of the box and than what Longview's used to, which I don't think I'm really that unique of a person. I think I'm pretty average in the grand scheme of the world, but in Longview, it's definitely stick out like a sore thumb. I've even like noticed that myself, being scared to be 100% like who I am around certain people, because I don't want to be judged. And even though like I'm 100% like the type of person who I don't care what people think about me, it's like I still find myself like, oh, we got to pump the brakes because that's a little bit too aggressive. I mean, do you ever feel like you fall into that, or do you feel like you're just, that's not an issue that's a non-issue for you at this point?
No, I definitely fall into that. It's strange. I don't think the town as a whole has a super problem, in person. It's weird. People with, social media make these grandstands and they're on this side or that side. But in public, when somebody notices my face tattoos or whatever, most of the time they're just curious.
Right.
I think maybe we're putting a bit of that on ourselves, because I mean, there is judgment, obviously.
Right,
but
yeah.
most of the time, I don't really have a problem with people, like, singling me out and being like, why the hell are you this way?
Right.
Why aren't you more like me?
I agree, yeah.
But I think that just really goes back to us not having a community. Because, we know each other, and I know a few other people, but a lot of the people that I know here, are nothing like me as far as the way I look, the way I believe in things. But I know they're here. There has to be some sort of a way we can...
Right. Well, and I agree. And so you're talking about like the lack of community. So the way that I feel about it is I feel like there's a bunch of us, but it's almost like a shotgun. Like we're just like scattered out. Like we haven't been able to like center ourselves and find the community. Obviously, locally, people that tend to be more like-minded, they commune in churches and stuff like that. But we as people who are non-religious and, we don't really find comfort in, church community or things like that. It's like we don't really know where to find each other. So like let's kind of talk about that. Like let's be real on how many people are in this community that aren't a part of that mindset, and let's talk a little bit about like your core beliefs and some misconceptions that you may have experienced with your core beliefs and how that conflicts with the community.
Well, we've definitely, my family, we've definitely dealt with people misunderstanding and think that we're like actual Satan worshipers or something like that.
Right.
It's hit us in a few different ways. I don't really know if there's like any real solution to that without having like some sort of like a place where people can actually hear us and see us, which I mean you guys are
like
kind of
platform,
doing
right
now.
Right.
Which this may be something that opens that up to the rest of the community. We're just different. We're not trying to, ruin your churches or your kids. We believe different. We can all coexist, whatever,
Right. So what would you say, like kind of piggybacking off of that, what would you say are some common misperceptions about you that you get often?
I mean, I've had people say that, and this is no shit, like that I drink blood.
I think I remember that.
And that we do like blood oaths at our house when the reality is, I'm homeschooling my children and...
Wait, aren't we scheduled to do that like here in like 10 minutes? Or are you, like,
I'm trying to...
Don't you know all vegans give blood oaths?
But, just like anybody else, we, aside from not going to church, we do all the, I take my kids to the park, I teach them how to fucking do math, I try to give them a moral compass.
Yeah, you're pretty fucking normal dad.
Yeah.
Just sans the dogma aspect of it.
Yeah, exactly.
So I get it. I relate. So like obviously knowing you, this is kind of a question that like I like inspired just from knowing you as a person, but like being in the limelight, being in the spotlight, obviously you're subject to like criticism more so than just like the average musician. So tell me a little bit about like what you've experienced, like as far as like hate and bullying and just negativity. Like, can you give examples of times that like you felt like personally, like, I don't know, like where people just like shit on you, like personally for your style, for your look, for your vibe, even like, let's talk about body shaming. Let's talk about all of that, because I don't feel like there's a lot of people in this community, because you're right. We get out in like normal face to face and people typically aren't like, hey, like you're an asshole. People don't typically do that, but like being world known, I'm sure you're more exposed to that type of criticism. So like what kind of criticism have you been exposed to?
The place that happens the most is YouTube, obviously, because it's anonymous. You can I've been called fat, or it's like, doesn't he look a little heavier this tour than last tour, or people just definitely are more willing to, I spend months, a year working on an album, I release a track, and people are just like, well, this is shit. I've actually had people tell me I should kill myself. Yeah, the internet's horrible. But most of it's positive. I can't, everybody notices the negative,
Right.
We
That's what I
all
was gonna
have
say.
a problem with loving ourselves sometimes. And so we know there'll be like 60 comments that are positive and great, and then just one.
Right.
And it's like, this is shit.
And that's the one that stands out.
Yeah.
So, like, when that happens, like, let's say that there's some, like, people listening to this interview and, they're super inspired by you, and they want to go out. Like, what advice would you give somebody that's, like, wanting to go out and they want to go to the level that you've gone on how to, like, kind of separate themselves from that negative criticism and, like, how to, like, get past that in, like, a more positive way?
Just don't. I mean, it's hard. I say don't read it, but, like, I still read it.
Right.
You have to focus on what you're doing. If what you're doing is making you happy, if what you're doing is, making you feel like more of a happy individual, then it really doesn't matter what anyone else does. Because art, in the end, is something that at least I do for myself first.
Right.
And if other people happen to like it, that's amazing. So I think you should just focus on
Not being validated by other people.
not being validated, yes. It's more about what it does for you.
Self-validation.
Yes.
I'm a fan. We were like talking a little bit ago about Perturbator and some of the like shit that was going on with drama and like people assuming like, let's just talk about it. So like, it's obviously been known that like some of the people that follow your group are like people who are involved in like hate crimes and shit, or not necessarily hate crimes, but like that are like fans of like Nazism and shit. So let's like talk about that and let's like squash that fucking rumor right here and now about how like you're not a Nazi, even though like Nazis have found to have tend to like you and Perturbator's music.
Yeah, I really don't exactly know how that happened. There was a video going around. There's like a quote. They quote it as being Hitler, and I don't think it is. It's like, are you ready for total war? I don't know who said it, but I don't think it's Hitler. They all think it's Hitler. They started posting this remix that Perturbator did of one of my songs, and it went viral with all these violent, ridiculous videos, and it got so far that the Washington Post or Times, I don't remember which one, wrote a story about James and blaming us for all these random hate crimes. So, no, I'm not a Nazi. Those guys are fucking clowns.
So do you think like it's easy to pin that shit on you though because of like the way people perceive people who like obviously have like that out of the box aesthetic? Do you think people are like, yeah, like that's fucking right, like that guy with all the tattoos and wears black, clearly he's a fucking crazy person and sacrificing goats and he's a Nazi? Do you think it's like a scapegoat for them? Or
absolutely, it's easy, rather than seeing that hatred and fucked upness and everything runs on both sides of the spectrum.
Somebody who's clean cut and
could be a total
child molester.
Absolutely. But yeah, and then you have like Marilyn Manson actually becoming a piece of shit like my mom said he was. I told her she was wrong, but she was right.
That's, yeah. I'm glad you brought that up because like that kind of hit hard for me though, because like I've always kind of liked Manson, and I was like, he's done those interviews in the past where he's like, your kids aren't, because they blamed him for the Columbine thing. He was like, your kids aren't shooting up kids because, of me. It's his own choices. And you kind of like look at that like, you're right. Like, but then he comes out that he's an actual piece of shit. And so like, it's hard to, it kind of sucks.
Yeah. I mean, we live in such a there's so much information on everything now. When Bowie died, like that really sucked for me. I was like, he was a great person for like the LGBTQ community, and it turns out that he was actually kind of a rapey bastard himself. And
but see, I didn't know any of that.
Yeah, he was like, I think at 29 he was grooming like a 13-year-old girl. Yeah. This is getting dark again. Anyway,
I love it. No, keep it going. Like this is perfect.
It's just when men are involved in positions of power, whether it's art, whether it's government, whether it's owning a fucking bar, anything, it seems like 9 times out of 10 they use that to their advantage in the wrong way, in a toxic way.
Regardless of what they believe.
Yes.
Yeah. So it's like,
I'm sure they go to church on Sunday.
That's seems to be the the walking parallel right there is that, I mean, I just had a conversation earlier today with somebody that's a friend of mine that is, you know, they identify as a Christian, and, you know, it was said that I respect your beliefs, you know, and I just believe that, you know, maybe God has picked you to be an atheist. Okay, cool. If that's like the way you need to look at it, like, I respect that. But like, the problem where it gets like kind of cloudy for me is like, don't give like my kindness off to God. Like, if I choose to be a good person, it's because I'm choosing that.
Absolutely.
And I feel like that even people who are religious and who are Christian can respect that, because technically the Bible preaches free will. So like, don't give like my choices, my good choices or my bad choices off to like any higher power. Like, humans are a product of their environment, they're a product of their choosing. So I feel like that could go either way. And
For
so
sure.
people need to stop stigmatizing people based off of stereotypes. And
I agree. Morality does not
like
come from an ancient book. Morality comes from just basic human decency. I think it's wild that, you know, we talk about Christians and we put them on this moral pedestal, that's, even we say things like, as a Christian, how can you do that? It's like,
right.
Why should we even say that? Like, just
Right.
as a human
As a person
who cares about other humans, why would you want to?
Right. Right. No, I agree. I agree 100%. And I think you're 100% right. So, I mean, I guess that kind of like, I know we kind of went off onto a tangent, but
I
like,
do that. I'm sorry.
no, it was perfect. I'm glad we talked, because like that's some of the stuff like we want to talk about is that, like, I feel like part of the reason why this is the first interview that you've done in your hometown, where your parents have obviously, like, I'm sorry if I'm not supposed to say this, but like, your parents have a name here. Like, they own a business locally. Their name is known. You know, if you were to mention, you know, your last name, people be like, oh, I know those people, you know, they've been in this town a long time. But also, like, there's also people like us who exist, and we've lived here our whole lives, and we don't know, there hasn't been any like recognition that the fact that like, here you are, Gost, this world-renowned artist, you're traveling in Europe, you're traveling all over the US, you know, like we stated, you have 20 million streams, over 20 million streams on Spotify. Why this isn't more, you know, sensationalized, I guess, in an aspect. I mean, you look at Neil McCoy, obviously, is hometown here, and everybody knows who Neil McCoy is in Longview, Texas. And I don't know, like, comparatively, like, how you guys, like, sync up in terms of how many people have listened to your music or whatever, but obviously he's a well-known name. But you go to somebody in Longview and be like, hey, do you know Neil McCoy? They're going to be like,
everyone knows who it is.
Absolutely. But you go to somebody in Longview and say, hey, do you know Gost? And they're going to be like, oh, you mean that like metal band, the GHOS? No, like GOST, Gost, synthwave. And they're going to be like, I have no idea what you're talking about. So kind of like rolling off of that, do you think that that is because of the genre of music that you're in? Or do you think it's because of who you are as a person and your aesthetic? Or do you think it's a combination of both?
Maybe a combination of both, but I think definitely more the way that I present myself and the way I look. Religion and superstition really just kind of murks the waters on all of that. Like,
it's like a comfortability zone to people.
Yeah, no one's going to want to be proud of me because of their superstition, because they can say, oh, well, you know, he's dark and weird and satanic, tattooed. When in reality, I mean, me and Neil McCoy are actually well acquainted. I could probably call him right now and ask him some stupid publishing advice. I don't know.
Right.
And he would definitely talk to me about it. Like, you know, as far as I know, he's a nice dude and we get along. So, I think people just get hung up on stereotypes, the way people look,
right?
Whatever.
And I was going to say, like, Longview is not, like, we're not, like, unknown for producing talent. I mean, like, we even wrote about this in our last Matthew McConaughey's from Longview.
Driving a Lincoln.
Brandon Maxwell's from Longview, who has, clothed several of our, presidents, first ladies, and
Gaga.
But you're right, and Lady Gaga, and it's just funny because like you are up there in terms of, publicity and fame, but a couple weekends ago, you and I sat right here at this bar, and we just shot the shit, and nobody, came by and was like, hey, like Ghost, like I know who you are. So it's just funny because you're right. I feel like you're a walking example of like people willing to accept and promote the things that fall into their perception of what is acceptable and what isn't. And it's just interesting, like, to see that perspective. And so I feel like some of the things that you were talking about was superstition and things like that, which kind of funnels into, like, your next album. So we've kind of talked about that. So your newest album and the concept, like, let's talk about that and, like, your vision for that and what inspired you for your newest album.
Sure. So the last couple have kind of been based on, like, or have come from like superstition and how people project that onto other humans in a negative way. So the new album is about witchcraft, and not just witchcraft, but how alternative type people have been persecuted and killed for nonsense throughout history.
Right.
Just misunderstandings. They look different, they think different, or just some ridiculous allegation, which we still have today. Like the way they go after victims of assault or anything like that, it's the same.
Well, even you yourself have been accused as like a Nazi influencer simply because of your style of music, when that's not even correlates to who you are as a person. And so that obviously falls into that like persecution, of like false accusations that aren't even true with how that.
I just think we're always like this close, in my opinion, like so close to mass hysteria on, putting someone on a witch trial, burning them alive. I don't think modern civilization is that far,
right.
as given, if the insurrection of last year, for instance. We're that close to superstition taking over again and outdoing logic and scaring people into these tropes where they want to persecute someone different because they fear what's different.
Right.
And so, yeah, the new album is definitely based heavily on that because I think it's still quite relevant.
It is.
You can still see someone called a whore, or for whatever reason.
What you're talking about.
But I think these things are important, and I think Longview needs to hear these things because Longview lives in a bubble outside of the rest of the world. I've traveled to so many places, and it's not that much different.
You're right.
Paris is not that much different than Texas. It really isn't.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's prettier. It's older.
You kind of expect it to be a little bit more, I don't know, I guess we always kind of like envision like Europeans being a little bit more ahead of us. But you've been there, so you don't feel like it is?
No.
Free healthcare.
They have free healthcare, yeah.
Yeah, okay.
But no, there's still it's a different.
Bring those green beans up here.
Yeah, let's get those green beans.
Yeah, let's get those green beans.
No, Europe doesn't really address racism like we do here. It's strange.
Can you explain? Because let me be honest, like I've always felt like Europe, because Americans are obviously known for like slavery and stuff. Like I always just felt like that kind of like missed Europeans. So explain. If I'm ignorant, like that's fine. Just educate me. Like explain that.
No, they've never had any social justice movements like we had with MLK and everything.
And they
like
do
that.
have racism and
Absolutely. It's a little more swept under the rug and ignored, but it's the same. They have the same stereotypes. They don't have the same names that they call people, but
yeah.
I've met plenty of Europeans that say really horrible things about, people of color, this, that, and the other. I get stared at in Paris the same as I get stared at in Walgreens.
Really?
In yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So, like, one thing that I've learned, like, kind of branching out, because I would say, like, early in my 20s, like, I was very in my shell as a person, and I only, like, talked to people who were, like, in my niche of thinking because I was scared. And so growing in my career, you know, in this community and branching out and kind of, like, getting to know people that didn't think like me, one thing that I did notice, and I can speak on behalf of Longview, is that Longview is a lot more progressive than we give credit for. And I feel like I'm spitting. It's fine. COVID, it's not a thing. I just spit. So I feel like Longview doesn't get enough credit in terms of, like, there's a lot of people here who are very fluid in how they think and maybe more middle ground. And I know, like, middle ground is kind of like, it's like a straddling the fence kind of thing, but I still feel like it's better than extremism either way.
Absolutely.
And so one thing that I've learned is that there's a lot more people that are super open-minded here, and you know, there's a lot of community here. It's just, I feel like people are scared, like they're not scared, or maybe they just feel like there's no point because there's not enough people rallying behind them. And that's great. Like, I guess that's kind of given me a little bit of comfort. But I guess my point is, and all that, is that I had to break out of being comfortable in my niche of, like, my people to understand that.
Yeah.
And so do you feel like maybe that's kind of what's going on the opposite end of the spectrum, that people maybe aren't as, like, you know, like we are in, like, artistic and music, that maybe, like, they feel the same way, but they feel, like, a little bit more uncomfortable because they're afraid of, like, how people will perceive them? And
yeah, for sure.
Have you experienced that, like, worldwide, and do you feel like that applies to Longview?
Yeah, I mean, people are people. You know, we were talking about earlier, I think you mentioned it, when you're face to face with another human, most of us can disagree, like horribly disagree, like down to our core. But at the end of the day, we're not gonna, like, kill each other over it.
Right.
We're not gonna say, you know, you deserve to die or you're going to hell. Like, at the end of the day, we'll have a conversation. We'll disagree. We'll agree.
Right.
Whatever. And we'll shake hands or hug or whatever people do. I don't know, because I'm not a human.
So as the 2 of the 6 vegans in Longview up here, we can say that's pretty true. Okay, so I'm going to ask, like, a super cliche question. Who inspires you? What inspires Gost?
Well, cliche answer, my wife, Tracy, inspires the shit out of me. She does, and my kids.
Not Tracy.
But musically...
I love her. She's my best friend, I can say that.
Anyone who takes a chance, whether it pans out or not. I've always loved Deaf Heaven, a band out of, I think, San Francisco. 9 Inch Nails, of course. Even Tool.
Oh, wow, he just openly admitted to Tool. Wow.
No, I think they suck now, but I used to like.
Oh, okay. shitting on my band. It's fine. It's fine.
But yeah, literally, and not just music, anything. Stylistically, I've always been super into fashion, and just loud people. Maybe that's why I like you.
Wow, loud people. Maybe
but
that's
no,
why
people
I
that
like
people
you.
that are open to change, and because I think people are so weird about change. Like, you know, if you change, like, as a man, if I change the way I dress overnight, people react to it in the strangest way.
Right.
Like, you never look the same. It's like, but you always look the same.
Right.
I don't know. I'm very inspired by progression in any way.
Yeah, I can support that. Tell everybody, like, where they can find your music, where they can buy your merch, where they can follow you, get updates, all of that fun stuff.
So everything social media wise is Facebook, Instagram, Twitter / 1980s. Sorry.
What a fucking loser.
/ Gost
Didn't even know it was
GOS.
a
Would you let me
fucking
talk?
band.
/GOST1980S. Okay?
867.
And it's available on Spot. Why am I even talking? You see what happens when.
I'm sorry.
No, you're not sorry. You're not sorry at all.
You're right, I'm not.
Spotify, Apple Music, YouTube, all those places.
Okay, great.
Or you can just stop by my house because I live here and just don't throw rocks through my window like I know a lot of you probably
If
want.
you want to get off on it like I do, go and read all the hate comments on YouTube about how it's the worst
do like
music
that, don't
they've
you?
ever listened to.
I bet you've screenshot it just so you can look at it over and over again.
I do. It's actually printed out on my wall. It's great. Okay, cool. So is there anything else that you want to tell us about, or anything that if people were to want to look up your music or know anything more about you, is there anything else you want to add before we close off the interview?
No, just that Longview's a weird place, but it's not a bad place. Pay attention to the people around you here because there are a lot of people doing really cool things, and fucking support local businesses. I don't know. Shit.
Hey! All right, toast to that. Come on, before we close it out, toast to that.
No, this one's empty.
Woo, wait, start over. Whee! Okay.